getting ready for a 2-week road trip. I have done full maintenance on both rigs and cleaned them. They're both probably the cleanest that they have been since they were new. Crawled around underneath, cleaned the frame. They've both been cleaned up very, very well. And the retro service was a big one. I had quite a bit of things to do, and I've got one thing left to do, which I'll tell you here in just a moment. First, let's just do it front to back. Not what I did in what order, but just front to back. I did replace the fork oil in both forks. 390 milliliters was put in. I used Motul 15 weight fork oil. You got to remove the front wheel. Of course, take the axle out, reverse threaded. There is a cap nut under here recessed up above the axle. Pull that out. Drains the fluid out. Then when you get ready to put the new fluid in, you need a 30 millimeter wrench. So this is a 30 millimeter. You can see it right there on it, 30 millimeter. Normal threads, just unscrew that. There's going to be some springs in there pushing up. Not too bad, but put your hand over it and you can unscrew it and pop that off. Fill it up with oil. When I drained them pretty good, let them set for a while, moved the fork around a little bit to try and siphon any oil out. I got 355 milliliters of oil out of the left fork. I got 379 milliliters out of the right fork as I'm facing them. I guess it's actually left, right, but you get the idea. So I got the fork oil changed. In the headlight, I put in a plug on the parking brake to make the parking brake stay off all the time, because I have removed the hand parking brake, and I removed it because my original cable, after 20 some odd thousand miles, broke, and the new cable is 2 feet shorter than the original cable, meaning it has to be rerouted, which brings it in through the prop shaft here, and I did not like the way it was turning out. So I just got rid of it. Didn't use it, didn't like the way that it adjusted, had problems with it. I just, for right now, zip tied this. I may revisit this in the future, but as soon as they arrive, I'm going to give the bullet brake a try. So that's a future video. I put the summer windscreen on here. You can see I still have the mounts for my big barn door, as people call it. That big plexi fairing, I took that off, and I've got my summer windscreen on here. And again, where it's applicable, I do it on both rigs. Now, the other thing I had to do here was I took the fuel tank off to do a couple of things under the fuel tank, but the biggest thing I did was improved the mounts. I was having a problem with this fuel tank moving. It would bounce up and down, and it would drum on the frame up here. So I fixed all that. I wrapped the rubber mounts with some anti-chafe tape to make them a little thicker. Worked perfect. And I also have this edge that I put on here, a thick, like, door edge, and put that on. That is going to do really well. So, of course, I changed the oil in the engine. I adjusted the valves, changed the oil in the transmission, cleaned thoroughly. I pulled the air filter. The air filter was fine, didn't need to be changed. I have a PC680 Odyssey battery on here that I put on here some time ago. Just cleaned all around that. Checked torque on, I've lost count of the bolts. Some of them needed to be torqued, some didn't. The other thing under the fuel tank, I was having problems with the top engine mount loosening. So I've put that back, blew Loctite, and double nutted it. So that should not be a thing that loosens up either. I can get under there with a wrench to tighten it with the fuel tank on, but I wanted to look at it and make sure I wasn't missing something because it just continues to loosen every several thousand miles. It was something routine I had to tighten whenever I change the oil. So I think that will stop that from loosening. Bolt right back here on the fender, same problem. Over time that would loosen. That's been pulled out and blue Loctited with a lock nut. Of course, I took the left muffler off, that pontoon. It was gone. Pulled the wheel off. You can see how nice and clean the rims are. My fingers are killing me. Cleaned up the brake caliper, checked everything over, greased the splines, pulled the final drive out, cleaned that up. Everything went well. And, you know, like I had to take the seat off, cleaned up under there. Most of it was just general nitpicky stuff. Whole litany of things that I had to do. And got it all back together, and I thought I was done. I went to tighten up the final drive, and the first bolt down there, the way I put on a final drive, so you can understand the process, do this on the CT, I do it on here, it's just how I do it. I put it back on, I finger tighten it so that the final drive will barely move. Then I run the axle in. Don't tighten these before you put the axle in. Put the axle in, got everything mounted, good to go. Then I come back and I torque to 25 Newton meters, 25 Newton meters. Then I torque to 35 Newton meters, 35 Newton meters, and it's done. And I do have the Nord lock washers on here. Those. If you don't have them, it's what you should run on your final drive. They're John Heindel knows what they are. Call him up and tell me you need Nord lock for your final drive. He'll fix you up. Use those. Everything was going great, so I set it to 25. My torque wrench beeped. Set it to 25. My torque wrench beeped. Set it to 35. My torque wrench beeped. Set it to 35, and it just kept turning. So I got suspicious very, very quickly. I then took a open-ended wrench, got on the top one, turned it, noticed the stud was not turning, but the stud was getting longer. I don't know if you can see it on here, but if you look at the bottom one, you see it's just over flush where the top one has begun to remove itself from the case. Yay. So the idea is that the top of the stud has broken or sheared off over time for whatever reason. I don't know. It wasn't over torqued. The process that I use, it would have been a problem. And I did both rigs at the same time. I actually, I tend to service both. I do the same thing on both rigs at the same time. So I'm changing the oil on both. I'm changing the transmission oil on both. I'm doing the final drive on both. And I started with the CT, torqued it, no changes to the wrench, came up here, and it was that last one that wouldn't torque down. And I even took a different wrench, went back and checked, and yeah, they're at 35 Newton meters. So it just decided it was time to fail right before, about a week before, we're going to be gone for 2 weeks. Riding. Also cleaned out the tub and ACF 50 and, stuff that I normally do to it. Check my bearings over here, all the fork spokes, the fork spokes. The spokes are all checked up to torque, making sure they're good. I only had 2 loose spokes between both bikes. I had 2 spokes that were less than, I think it's 35 inch-pounds. Only 2, so that was fine, and they tightened right up. And that's where I'm at. I am now going to have to pull this rear tire back off, get the final drive off, and put in a new stud. And while I'm doing it, I'm going to install a new drive gear.